Hello and welcome to another session of UK Sailmakers Lessons Learned, conversations where sailors chat with each other about things that are important to other sailors. I'm here today with Dick York. Hello, Dick.
Hello, thank you
And
for having me.
I have to say that in all transparency, I've known and been sailing with Dick for probably 50 years. And there's nobody I'd rather go offshore with than Dick. What we're going to talk about today is some initiatives that Dick has been involved with over the last probably 20 or so years involving safety at sea. And in particular of interest to me is evolving techniques in man overboard recovery. But before we do that, Dick, share a little bit about some of the people that you're involved with, some of the organizations you're involved with right now in terms of safety at sea.
Right now, I am chairman of the U.S. Sailing Safety at Sea Committee, but I do have to say I'm also on the committees for Storm Trysail Club, New York Yacht Club, and the CCA. My committee at U.S. Sailing, in fact, has people from many of those safety committees on those clubs I just talked about. And there's really a community of 40 to 100 people in the United States who focus on safety at sea. And it's great working with all these people. Everyone likes to contribute. Everyone works hard. So we're fortunate in the United States to have such a good group looking at safety at sea.
One of the things that I was in his breakout group for a couple of years ago during the pandemic was the Storm Trysail's Offshore Sailing Leadership Symposium, where we did get many, if not all of those thought leaders from across the country and some from around the world, sharing their thoughts on different specific silos of safety at sea. But Dick, give me a little bit about how you got involved with safety at sea. What drove you to become interested enough to figure out how to do it better?
I did a lot of sailing in the U.S. I did my first Bermuda race, I guess, in 1974. I did about 5 of those. And then I moved to Chicago, where we did a little bit less racing to Bermuda. But I went offshore sailing my boat, J46, to the islands every winter and up here in New England in the summer. And then in 2003, we took off and went around the world. It took us about 4 years to get around, fall of 2003 to summer of 2007. And on that trip, I really had an important focus on safety. First, I set up the boat according to World Sailing Category 1 requirements. It's very valuable if you're going offshore to read and look at your boat with those kinds of requirements, or using the U.S. Sailing Special Safety Equipment requirements. Either one of those provides a great way to set up your boat. We got around with no problems. It's interesting that when you're offshore and you only have 3 people. Anyway, we got back and I was looking around at the world and noticed that a lot of people were unaware of some of the issues with regard to safety at sea. This included everybody from couples just cruising at our own club and the club cruise, all the way up to some of the racers out there who took safety or didn't think of it at all, took it far too lightly. So I got involved. My interest was to help sailors be aware of and deal with safety issues. I thought it was an important way for me to give back to our sport. So I kept on working with all the organizations I talked about earlier, and I'm still working away. I think I'll keep on doing this until I take my final voyage. It's important to give back to your community. Everybody should be doing it. This happens to be the way I chose.
One of the things that I found interesting, Dick, is when you got back from your circumnavigation is that you started on a small basis with what you called cruising couples, because there's so much liability there and there's so little awareness of what to do with the other person on the boat goes over the side.
Yeah, it's all the way from that. And whenever we talked about cruising couples, one of the lines you all may have heard is great. It's called "Suddenly Alone." What if one person in the couple is suddenly alone because the other one went over the side or suffered a major heart attack or broken arm even? something simple as that. And that title for the couples cruising really got everybody focused. Probably too scary right now, so we call it Safety for Cruising Couples, but the subtitle of Suddenly Alone is still important. And it's not so much where we have to teach everybody to do everything on the boat, but we do have to make sure that both the parties on a small boat are competent in doing some of the basic things on a boat, so that if the other person is injured or overboard, they can comfortably get the other party and them back to shore safely. Some of that does, of course, include how to call for help. We teach that simply. Man overboard is always an issue in every kind of safety training we do. People are very, very concerned about this because it's apparently the most scary thing on a boat, that somebody has gone over the side. So we spend a lot of time working on man overboard recovery, and we did a lot for man overboard recovery when you're short-handed. That's where we started. The cruising couples course I originally gave at Larchmont is morphed into a course that the CCA has developed, and we also give with New York Yacht Club.
Let me shift gears on you, Dick, a little bit, because
Okay.
for years, you and I and others in our cadre of safety at sea people have been teaching this, the quick stop, sail along next to the person, pickup. We're not teaching that anymore that way. Talk to me a little bit about why.
Okay, we've spent a lot of time researching what's going on in man overboard recovery. There were a number of incidents. There were 22 major incidents that I kind of edited a paper where we had top names in the world review very specific man overboard instances. Half of them we had successful recoveries. Half of them were unsuccessful and the person was lost. And in looking at those, we found a number of commonalities. And we started to change our techniques for how to recover people who have gone overboard, especially off modern boats. As a result of that, and a bunch of experimentation done by Storm Trysail and many other clubs, the U.S. Navy at the Naval Academy has been doing great work on man overboard recovery also. We conducted a symposium off Newport about a year ago. That would have been June of 2023. And we did some experimentation in waves and at night, in addition to our normal testing of man overboard recovery techniques.
So, Dick, the traditional quick stop, you went up to the wind, backed the jib, dropped the jib as you came around, and you reached up and picked up the person right off the side of the boat. There's been a major change in the philosophy of how we do that now, because there's a very simple device that we all have on our boat that we weren't using. Tell me a little bit about that.
The Lifesling was invented by the Sailing Foundation a number of years ago, and it's worked its way into the safety equipment requirements at both the world sailing and the U.S. sailing level. I think you all know what a Lifesling is, but it's basically a harness attached to a 150-foot line, the end of which that line is tied to the boat. What we found when we did our research is too many cases, the traditional circling back that you described became a problem because the boat was uncontrollable at slow speed when you're trying to bring the boat alongside the person. To put it very bluntly, there were two cases where the boat most likely ran over the person and created significant enough trauma that it contributed to the death of those people. So we decided it wasn't a very good idea to bring somebody alongside. And if you have the life sling, trailing the life sling and picking the person up by simply circling the person the way you would a water skier is a very, very efficient and safe way of getting the boat and the person attached to each other.
So, Dick, what are we doing differently now than we were doing before?
Well, after all our testing at our MOB symposium last summer, we found that there were a number of things that were important in the old days and important now. The first thing that you should be doing after somebody falls overboard is deploying flotation. Many modern race boats have a Mom 8 or something that's equivalent. So you should be deploying that. It makes it easier to see where the person is because there's a pylon. And if the MOB has a life vest on that didn't inflate because it was not well maintained or didn't have a life vest on to begin with, that provides flotation. The MOB can swim to it and hold on to the horseshoe that's on the Mom 8. I have to say this because there have been too many cases where people in their haste have forgotten to deploy flotation to somebody going overboard. And by the time the boat gets back to them, even if they've done a great job of getting back to them, the person has already expired. The second concept is to stay close to the victim. Buttons, you mentioned the quick stop. The very first part of the quick stop, and you should be using this, is if you're beating up wind, you tack the boat without touching any of the sheets. The jib becomes a back, and you stop the boat very close to the man overboard. Typically, if you do this, we find in practice, you're probably a boat length or a boat length and a half away. Distance is the enemy. At this point, you should have assigned a spotter to keep one eye on the MOB. But if you're a double hander or a cruising couple, you may not be able to constantly have somebody pointing at the MOB. So therefore, you have to stay close. And in the general region, if you get too far away, you're going to lose sight of them, either in waves or just in distance. And that makes your recovery geometrically more difficult. Circling around that you described before, Buttons, is exactly what you want to do now, but don't bring the boat up next to the victim. After you've stopped the boat, deploy your life sling, turn on your engine if you have it, but don't put it in gear unless you know all the lines are back aboard. Then circle around, jibe around, but circle the MOB as we've talked about, leaving the life sling trailing behind and pick them up as you would a water skier. The next principle is stop the boat then, so you don't drag the person through the water. Douse sails if you think you have to. And the fifth and final step is to hoist them back aboard. They're already in the life sling. All you have to do is pull that life sling line toward you. You should have tied a knot about 11 feet above the sling. Put that on a halyard and you can hoist away. You're going to be worried about running around getting a halyard. It's easy to cleat the person off next to the boat and then hoist them after you've connected the halyard to that loop you've tied in the line.
So the real challenge is getting somebody out of the water that might be dead weight or is just weighs 150, 200 pounds manually.
Well, that's the other thing about modern boats. We've talked about a number of things about modern boats, and I could go through the pros and cons a lot, but there's a couple of good things about modern boats. One is, I mentioned turning on the engine. Engines are much more powerful on boats than they were 25 and 30 years ago. So you should really use the engine as part of your approach. The other thing is most boats now have much larger winches, or in many cases, power winches. So you can take the end of that halyard and really pick somebody up, even if they're 220 pounds soaking wet. Even on my boat, which is rather old and does not have power winches, a good halyard winch or a good primary winch provides a leverage for a 70-year-old female who's not necessarily in the best shape to pull somebody like me out of the water.
Dick, when you did this offshore training last year in Newport, the thing that I thought was interesting is that rather than being on placid water where there's no waves and it's in the middle of the day, so man overboard recovery is sort of rote, you actually went out and did it at night in the ocean. But I understand that there was something that sort of came up with the life slings that was relatively easy to address.
Yes, we hadn't really done enough nighttime testing at all, so I required that to be part of our symposium. And what you really found was that life sling really needs good lighting. The safety equipment requirements require a light. Most people tie it on the back of the life sling. That's not working well when you're trying to circle a person in the water, they have to be able to see the life sling, and the people aboard the boat need to know where the life sling line is. So Rich DeMullen of Storm Trysail Club and a member of my committee devised a system of putting two lights on the front of the life sling, on the open side of the life sling, and also putting some bright reflecting soulless tape on the life sling line, the 150-foot line. You can put some tape on every 6 or 8 feet.
But I also think the reflective tape on the hoist itself, so when you're scanning with a light, you can see it, sort of like finding a buoy.
You're exactly right. We had 2 people on deck with very strong searchlights, or nowadays even a very strong flashlight, and that lights up that line. It just shines. It's amazing, and you'd think there was lights on the line, and that provided me with very good perception of how far away the life sling was from the person in the water, in this case a dummy in the water, and how close I was tracking and how far away the life sling was from them. It really, really helped make it all work well.
But in addition to it helping you on the boat, it also has to help the person in the water find it.
Exactly. What we typically find in a life sling pickup, the person ends up grabbing the line before the life sling gets to them. In this case, again, the reflection on the line would show them where to grab or where to swim to, and they would also not be surprised by the sling coming up. They would see it coming because these 2 lights are on it. So we think that was a very successful modifications that we've made to the life sling, and we have a recommendation paper on that.
So Dick, what's next in terms of the development of man overboard recovery techniques?
Well, the big thing that we started playing around with last summer, and we have some people doing individual efforts on this, is how to pick up someone who has some trauma so they can't have the life sling over them. They can't get in the life sling, or they can't stay in the sling if they've been in there, or they've been hit in the head hard enough that they're unconscious and just floating in the water on their PFD. So we've been playing around with various techniques to lower somebody over the side of a boat. Probably only going to do this with a fully crewed boat, but lower one of the crew members over the side with a rescue sling. Rescue slings are very common in the first responder industry, and we've attached lines to the halyard that you're going over the side with straps that we can get around something on the person who is in the water and get them back. Unfortunately, you have to bring the boat very close on this. If the person is more than 10 feet away or 8 feet away from the boat, then you need a trained rescue swimmer, which is an entirely different beast. So we're trying to develop systems to be able to do this for the average offshore racer or offshore cruiser. Again, putting somebody else over the side is a very, very scary issue. And if you only have 3, maybe even only 4 aboard, you probably can't do it. Certainly, if you have a fully crewed boat with 5 or 7 or 10 people, then it becomes practical to begin thinking about doing that. UK Sailmakers has been really, really good about helping out in all our investigations. The dummies that we throw over the side to emulate a person in the water, which when filled with water weigh about 180 or 200 pounds and make it very real. Those dummies were made up by UK Sailmakers. Butch Ulmer is a leader in training in man overboard recovery. UK Sailmakers also does good things like sponsors many of our junior safety at sea programs, which are done by Storm Trysail Club around the country.
And in addition, on the UK website, under the how-to section, there are all sorts of videos. We have to give a shout out to Adam Laurie, who produced most of them on safety at sea issues, as well as boat handling issues. Well, Dick, thank you. It's been an interesting journey with you over these years, as we've got a little bit more gray hair, but we've also learned a lot more about man overboard recovery and safety at sea in general. And on behalf of UK Sailmakers and all of our sailors out there, thanks for joining us on Lessons Learned.
Thank you for having us. I'm glad we can help you out and spread the word.
Thanks for joining another episode of UK Sailmakers Lessons Learned. You can access the full library of Lessons Learned podcasts in our how-to section on uksailmakers.com. Episodes are also available on our Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. For UK Sailmakers, I'm Buttons Padin, and I hope these lessons learned will help you sail with confidence.